All right, Steelers fans, welcome into the Knoll Road. We have a new wide receiver in the mix. We've talked about Tyreek Hill. We've talked about Terry McLaurin. How about some Jakobi Meyers? Is this the move to make, Steelers fans? Leave a comment down below. Let's get the conversation started. Also, how good is this roster compared to the other great rosters of this century? Plus, Aaron Rodgers' thoughts on what we believe is the single best bet you can make on the Pittsburgh Steelers for the 2025 season. Okay, here we go.
To the corner of the end zone. Oh, for a touchdown!
All right, welcome in. I'm Gavin Dawson, 25-year sports radio veteran, and joining me, as always, the all-academic SEC lineman at Kentucky, Newt Bear Lesniewski. How the hell you doing, buddy?
You know, I'm a little perturbed. My boy keeps getting up on the shelves and tearing down the starting lineup. So I got Captain Comeback hanging in the shotgun with me. Thankfully, he hasn't gotten to the Bradshaw or Captain America yet. So
it's why they make those kids so dang cute, man. Because if they weren't, we wouldn't love them so much, I guess.
Homer Simpson meme getting into Bart.
Well, he's just excited for football season, like we all are now. Inside 2 weeks till week 1, and the excitement around this team is just undeniable. It's awesome to cover. A couple of questions here, as it's clear that the Steelers want to make a move at wide receiver. What would adding a wide receiver like Jakobi Meyers do for these Steelers? How much would it add to the quality they already have? And is this the best place to spend resources? It definitely seems like the Steelers are focused on this. I would like to know what else they're considering, because I feel like when it comes to making Aaron Rodgers the best version of himself, adding wide receiver would help, but also we might want to add protection. We might want to add a star runner at some point. So I hope this is just the beginning of them trying to finalize a championship caliber roster, New Bear.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that everything's on the table given the fact that just what they did in the kicking room with the punter choice. And, you know, the basically what the end of the day they're doing there is making the move they made to save $1.5 million ish to push them to a place where they could take on another big contract and have the room for that, or go into the season with a ton of cap to be extremely flexible over the next 18 weeks. So it seems like they're really looking under couch cushions and turning over every leaf, because that seemed like a slam dunk if you got another team willing to offer you picks for a punter. But they're in a driver's seat right now, and it's just going to be interesting to see what they decide to hit the gas on.
Okay, so on Jakobi Meyers, where are you at with this? Are you big thumbs up? Are you Or are you maybe hoping for more? I think he's a perfect wide receiver too. The kind of breakout season last year from him. What did he end up with? His first 1,000-yard season, but it's been so consistent with around 12 yards a catch and 800 yards or so. You know, I think, what do you have to give up to get him, and what kind of money is he looking for? I would imagine it's somewhere $15 to $20 million. So it's a significant expenditure. So that's kind of where my thought of, hey, you know, be careful who you're bringing in. Tyreek Hill, who might be towards the end of his career, might be a little bit happier with making less and maybe gives you more upside. So, you know, Meyers would help the team. I just don't know if it's the best allocation of the resources they have.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about throwing up, you know, pushing 90 and over 1,000 at 12 per, catching balls from Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, that's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, he's a good receiver. He's a legitimate wide receiver too. The challenge for me is that I think you're light in the wallet. There's reports out there with him talking about wanting 25, 23, Ooh. 25. Ooh. I mean, given age, given production, given upward trend, given slotting into a team and helping them, you know, take the leap. And that's what we're really talking about here with this team. And I said yesterday, going back and forth with some folks on Twitter, that if this is what you're going to do, and you're going to invest in him and make him the clear wide receiver 2 and make him DK Metcalf's running mate for the next, 4 years and lock them up on a parallel path, that's one thing. But if you're not going to do that, if it's really just a rental, then I'm almost more inclined to just be good with #Roman Wilson season and see what you have. And if he can become the guy, because if he can't, then you're talking about the 2026 draft painted in a different light.
Yeah. I think you have such good tight end play. And do you really need a wide receiver too? I would say you probably have enough right now, along with this defense, that you can compete for a Super Bowl. But do you want to put yourself in a position? And Jakobi Meyers does have the route quality. He has the great hands to be a perfect Aaron Rodgers complementary wide receiver. And as much as I want to believe in that Roman Wilson can take a big step up and he is going to be a solid pro, I mean, I like him as wide receiver 2. I love him as wide receiver 3. Troy Aikman, famously says you're really only as good as your third best wide receiver, because the defense is going to be good at taking away your number 1 option. And then after that, you're looking at your second best wide receiver going up against, a good corner, and they'll figure out a way to mitigate his impact. But if you have a third passing option, that's incredible. Now you're really putting the defense in some circumstances that they don't have great answers for. So, that's a long way of saying Meyers would make you better. And if you really want to take a step forward in establishing yourself as the favorite, not as a team hoping to win the Super Bowl, but as a team that you can legitimately expect it to, then, I think Meyers is the move. But it's an overpay. And again, I think you're going to get into the season and there's going to be offensive linemen coming available. Like, the NFL trade market is real now. And who knows what you're going to have at running back. But if you really want to take pressure off of Aaron Rodgers, and I guarantee at some point in the first 8 weeks of the season, before we get to the trade deadline, New Bear, you're going to have 3-and-out games. You're going to have less than 10-point games. Like, let's not act like this didn't even happen for Aaron Rodgers in the middle of his MVP seasons or with the Jets last year, right? So I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to ride in and light the league on fire. He's a guy that can do a hell of a job for you at quarterback, but I don't think he's a guy that's going to go out there and dominate it on his own anymore.
Jakobi Meyers is really the only guy who's sort of in between that's left, because, you're seeing with cut day, you're seeing these guys like Malachi Corley, who, was his nickname was the Yak King coming out of college. He's got this great tape from a smaller school, but with traits that you like. He's a Steeler type of wide receiver. But isn't Roman Wilson supposed to be that? Aren't we ready for Calvin Austin III to finally break out? Like, the difference between what you have on this roster and what other guys are cutting at the end of theirs is a completely different conversation than, is Jakobi Meyers a legit wide receiver 2? And then is Cheetah the only one that you would then go out and make a move for? Tyreek Hill, Miami falling off a cliff. I mean, Mike, you talk about betting odds and some of the over-under stuff you want to talk about. I mean, Mike McDaniel's the first coach to get fired everywhere you can put money on it. So you start thinking about rental versus long-term. You start thinking about developmental versus known quantity. And of all the things to consider, what's really interesting about the Jakobi Meyers thing is that, unlike Terry McLaurin, he would come in here not expecting to be wide receiver 1. He'd probably be really happy to slide alongside DK Metcalf and wreak some havoc.
Yeah. But if he wants $25 million, that's a massive overpay, I think, for that level of performance. Basically an 800-yard wide receiver. And you can say, well, put him with better players, put him in a better offense, but that doesn't necessarily always work out. But let me say this to the financial commitment you'd have to make in a significant overpay, I believe, for Jakobi Meyers. The most interesting piece of information here when it comes to the Steelers winning the Super Bowl is, if you aren't the Chiefs, or if you're not the Patriots with Tom Brady, who figured out how to get over on the league every year because a combination of quarterback play, coaching excellence, and great defense. Really, maybe it's an undersold part of both of these dynasties that we're seeing, but everybody else is having to ride the salary cap yo-yo and say, this is our year. We're going all in. We have 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. We have 26-year-old Jalen Hurts. These guys aren't difference-making quarterbacks. They're guys that can be good quarterbacks on Super Bowl winning teams, though. If you look at it like, how did the 49ers get there with Jimmy Garoppolo or Brock Purdy? It's because they got more good players and they were well coached. I believe the Steelers are going to be well coached, but you have to get more good players. Somehow the Chiefs won the Super Bowl in a rebuilding year. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes is not real life. You can't say, well, they did it, we're going to try to do it to it too. That is a recipe for being wild card out, division round and out, not making the playoffs. Like, that isn't real. What the Steelers competed against when they won their Super Bowls in 2005 and 2008 was a team or a league that was, not really souped up the way that it is now. And what I mean by that is now teams have realized in order for us to beat the GOAT quarterbacks, we got to go all in. And you got to flush the idea that you're preserving your ability to contend in this 4 or 5 year window. That's not real life unless you have a GOAT quarterback and, whatever sort of witchcraft Andy Reid is doing to dominate the playoffs, no matter what city or conference he's in, New Bear.
This is where you're about to really put the both now and next to the test for the first time in what is clearly Omar Khan's franchise, right? As we're looking at this, and people aren't joking about it being Mike T's decision. They're saying, "Hey, Omar, let's get this done," and quote tweeting over the top Jakobi Meyers, just like they were doing with Terry McLaurin. And what's going to be really interesting to see is the moves that they do or don't make tell you exactly what they do or don't believe about the makeup of this current roster. Because if you're talking about making a run, chasing the 7th Lombardi, and this is all in on Aaron Rodgers, one and done, then you have to do more. If you're talking about trying to get him to come back for a cameo, like we've seen DK and Cam and some of these guys, nudging him about age 42, when we're talking about 41 being the take my ball and go home, this is the right off into the sunset. But Aaron Rodgers is also saying, I wish I could have played my whole career here. I wish I could have played 13, 15 years in Green Bay and 13, 15 years for Mike Tomlin, because he doesn't want to bleep on Green Bay, right? But he loves Coach T. He loves this team, and he loves, what's there and what also could still be added to it. And so this is really going to give us that answer about how much do we really believe in Roman Wilson? Because if you're as high on the kid as Aaron Rodgers says he is, and the team believes that, like their quarterback does, and this is going to be the guy that if you go sign Jakobi Meyers, you retard Roman Wilson's development as true wide receiver 2 going forward.
If you really believe in it, I don't think we'd see the headlines that we've been seeing.
Well, I think it's just availability, because you're talking about McLaurin and you're talking about that money. At that level, you can justify that money. Can you justify it? You're talking about it being a gross overpay for a guy like Jakobi Meyers, but then you bring it into him. He's younger. You bring it into it that he's produced with lesser. You bring it into it like, what do you really need out of wide receiver 2 here? And a guy that you maybe have to wait until, I don't know, week 8 for the light to go on, right? Like, we talk about what's going to happen when Roman Wilson has his first touchdown. It's really about how he handles success now that he's started to show he can handle adversity. And how do you go week to week when Aaron Rodgers is going to be expecting certain things? And then, what happens, of course, if DK is out for 4 or 6 and he becomes wide receiver 1, like you were talking about what some of the pundits talk about, how you're only as good as wide receiver 2. Aikman knowing that, is as good as anyone, going from the playmaker to Harper being able to take pressure off him and burst games open and take playoff games over, right? Making the most out of every opportunity that he gets in a completely different era, going, 21 yards per catch, putting the Niners out of their misery in championship games. But like, if something were to happen to DK in the scenario that we're in right now, you're not talking about wide receiver 2. You're talking about 2s and 3s. What do we say? We've got 4 3s in the room. Now one of those guys has got to be 1. So one of the other things that the McLaurin thing would have done is mitigated some of that. One of the things the Cheetah thing would do is mitigate some of that. And then you're in the levels conversation. Are we doing this on a parallel path with DK? And we're talking about, the next 4 years? Are we doing this as a rental with Cheetah on almost like a prove it deal to show that he's still got something left in the tank, try to go get paid one more time? Or are you talking about this collection of ragtag guys who are basically all the same, and they're going to be fighting each other to answer a question that you're still going to have in 2026?
Yeah, I think Jakobi Meyers wants to get paid really bad right now because he realizes what happened last year with the Raiders, where he was really the only wide receiver with experience that a quarterback could depend on. And you had Bowers, but after you traded Devontae Adams, it was young guys and running backs getting targets other than Jakobi Meyers. And at some point, all of these guys are NFL quarterbacks that are throwing to him. NFL teams are going to get somewhere between 220 and 270 yards passing, even if they're not a very good passing game. And wide receivers who run good routes and have good hands are going to find a way to produce, because offensive coordinators are going to scheme to get them open when it's really the best thing you have going on beyond Brock Bowers. And, I think right now he's negotiating from a position of strength because the Raiders are going for it, and he knows they really don't want to trade him. So I don't expect a Meyers trade, but I'm going to let the Raiders deal with that. Preserve my powder. I'm going to keep my gunpowder dry for once we get into the season and have really a better understanding of what this offense needs. And maybe it is a wide receiver too. I would like if I'm spending $25 million to get a little bit more yak ability, more big play ability, more speed, more game-breaking speed for $25 million. You kidding me? You're producing around $12 to $15 million, but you want 25. I get it. We could have injuries. We could have a disappointment in the running back spot. You could get to a point where defenses are playing clog and cover and staying in shells and still able to get pressure on your offensive line. If you want to win a championship, you can't settle for, well, our offensive line's going to be average and our quarterback is 41 years old. Can you? No, you can't. So if you're serious about going all in and winning a Super Bowl, I need that powder possibly to help Aaron Rodgers in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about 21 yards a catch with Alvin Harper and not think about guys like Mike Wallace. Think about how when Pittsburgh's really been elite and dangerous as an offensive team, you got a big sturdy back, and on those teams you're talking about Mendenhall, you got Wallace going over the top, you got Hines Ward and Heath Miller handling the dirty work, and you still on that roster have young Emmanuel Sanders coming. You've got the wily veteran in Randall L. You have these wicked collections of guys at different stages of their careers with different skill sets that bring really unique things to the table and then use them accordingly, right? Depending on if it's Arians or Haley or, whoever the guy is who's scheming it up. And obviously throughout, the course of most of this time, you're talking about Ben being the guy feeding them, whether you're going from, Wallace into AB and still Heath and still Hines and still Sanders. And then you look back over at some of these teams and you're like, man, I totally forgot Jericho Cotchery was on that roster too, or I totally forgot. And it's just, they've always had these unique collections of guys who had very specific roles, and then they went out and executed. And I think the thing that everyone is really curious to see is, what does DK Metcalf look like it's not really the Devontae Adams role. It's not really the Jordy Nelson role. This isn't the Green Bay Packers offense where, excuse me, even if wide receiver one is the volume target share guy, how are those targets going to come when you're also talking about playing /4 personnel? And I'm making jokes about, hey, in this Jakobi Meyers trade, can we just go get Michael Mayer too and play nothing but tight ends? I mean, Freiermuth's got to eat. Jonnu Smith's got to eat. We're talking about Mount Washington having a potential breakout. So your point's a really strong one about what do we really even need from wide receiver two. But before we even get there, it's like, what does DK Metcalf's role really look like? How are they using him to take the top off? Because if he plays more like he did and has to date, where he's running post, corner, deep balls, and that's a big part of his job, then how well are all those tight ends playing underneath him? And then you can see how a technician and how a guy who's maybe been less heralded and maybe even unheralded at this point, like a Jakobi Meyers, could come in and be a true difference maker for this team.
Yeah. And I guess I should clarify, Newbear, before I get eaten alive in the comments, which has probably already happened. The 2008 offensive line that the Steelers won the Super Bowl with wasn't great, but that's to my point that the bar has been elevated and what it's going to take to win a Super Bowl. I don't think you can do what they did anymore. And maybe that was a very special set of circumstances with the weapons and the quality of that defense and the quality of the runner that, allowed all of that to come together. But there was a lot of magic that went into that. And again, that was the wild card era of the NFL relative to the Super Bowl. That era is past, and I believe Omar Khan knows that.
Yeah, and I mean, along the same lines about, getting eaten alive in comments, I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that DK Metcalf came here to be a decoy, and we're certainly not paying him like one and gave up draft capital to use him like that. But what we've seen so far, and again, practice again preseason, is a lot of those forced balls, shallows, sticks, Like a lot of the short and intermediate stuff that isn't necessarily what you think about when you think about DK Metcalf. And when you think about Aaron Rodgers and his wide receiver one traditionally, what are you thinking about? Back shoulder throws, timing routes, precision, developing that chemistry where we're almost drawing stuff up in the dirt like Steve Spurrier and the Fun and Gun with insert quarterback one and a collection of dudes who are going to go catch balls on Sunday for 10 years, figure it out. And there's going to be some of that because, Aaron Rodgers is going to do Aaron Rodgers stuff. But how much of the scheme dictates opportunity for a guy who's going to need to eat alongside DK and these tight ends? And I honestly want to see a ton of action from the backfield. I want to see Warren and Caleb Johnson and Gainwell and Trey Sermon and these guys that they are throwing screen game to, that they are using Texas routes and some of this fun stuff so far in the preseason. Like, use that stuff as well to take some of the pressure in the quick game off, where we're not just talking RPO, we're not just talking bubble tunnel. We're literally using these weapons that we have to go not just vertical stretch, but horizontal too.
Yeah, there was a stretch after the Green Bay Super Bowl where they didn't have a great running game or running back, but they used like Ty Montgomery as like a wide receiver running back.
Number 88 in the backfield.
They just tormented teams with that. Yeah. And that, I thought that was an incredible job by Aaron Rodgers, and hopefully he can still do that kind of stuff to mitigate defensive pressure. Okay, let's go to the next topic here on the Knoll Road. Bill Cowher thinks Steelers have their best team since their last playoff win. So that was the 2016 team. I think this team is probably even better as much as that 2016 offense was exciting. I think the defense is what's going to win championships. So I would hope that this team is better than 2016, because I didn't really feel like that team was an actual contender. The ability to put up points in the regular season, to play exciting offense, is often fool's gold. So to me, when you talk about how good a team is and how capable they are of winning in January, it's always got to start with the defense.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about the killer bees and just think about what was left on the table. I mean, when you look at some of the years that Bell and Brown and, you got young Juju coming in, setting records, based on his age and games played and things like that rival guys like Anquan Bolden. You had Martavis Bryant, who, you talk about Mike Wallace and some of these guys that they've had who are just freaks of nature, who just couldn't keep it together and really, forget staying with the team, couldn't stay in the league in some cases, and Heath Miller becomes a Jesse James, or, Mendenhall becomes James Conner. Insert your favorite guy going from Bussy, into modern times. Like, they've always had that big back, and they've always had that gritty, grimy wide receiver doing the dirty work. And then they got a guy who could go take the top off. And then they got a tight end that you buy his jersey because he's either got the coolest name or it's one that you can say in the stadium that sounds like you're booing. And it's just always been slotted in a certain way where you're going into this game going, oh, okay, this is where AB does his work. And then this is how everyone else plays off of him. AB obviously being a super freak who could do just about anything. But like, when you think about those teams, maybe they didn't have as much defense, or the defense is getting older and they weren't holding up their end of the bargain, which is how you go out to a Blake Bortles in the playoffs, right? And I'm saying this because Cowher said 16, you could argue that the 17 team was even more exciting. It's a 13-3 squad. And, you go through all the stuff before, Ben's arm falls off and people start literally going crazy after the Burfict hit, right? And that everyone goes back to as the flashpoint for everything that kind of turned AB into what we know him as today with CT, ESPN and stuff. You go back over time and just you see Santonio Holmes making that catch in the corner of the end zone, and you drop Ben Roethlisberger from that game, from that drive into any moment in time, and think about him with real defense, and you go, it's hard to pick any of these teams over anyone else, because it's like, what do you like? Are you a Bettis guy? Are you a Mendenhall guy? Are you a fast Willie Parker guy? Are you Heath Miller or bust? Or is AB the GOAT? So it's got to be someone from that time, even though they couldn't get it done. It's a really cool thing to think about how much the game has changed, how much eras have changed. And Tomlin's really the bridge, right? The pivot to lean into some Ryan Clark stuff through all of that. And he's still here, and we're still having this conversation. And now we're doing it with a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers.
We are. And, I think that should give you a chance. Like, he was better last year than I think a lot of people want to give him credit for because the Jets didn't win. Speaking of Ryan Clark, that was one of his takes recently that I wholeheartedly agree with. Okay. And speaking of Aaron Rodgers, let me jump over here. He was on with Adam Shine, asked about the Vegas prediction, the over-under win total for the Steelers, which is at 7.5.
Oh my goodness.
And so here's Rodgers. Leave your comments down below, or I'm sorry, 8.5. What do you think of Steelers over under 8.5 win total here for 2025? Here we go.
Do you feel as if people on the outside, Vegas has you about 8.5 wins this season, sleeping on how great, not good, great the Steelers can be this year?
I don't really care about any of those prognostications. Shine. I feel like the staff that we have on both sides of the ball, the leadership that we have, the organizational structure gives you a chance for sure. And that's all we can ask for. I think as far as outside narrative's sake, sometimes it's easier when there's low expectations. And
sometimes it's easier with low expectations. I love it. I think Aaron Rodgers relaxing there. I don't know. Maybe he was, enjoying some holistic medicine, but he's so laid back, dude. Let me just say about this team, 12-5 minimum. I could see 15-2 when I look at the schedule, and I understand the NFC North is going to be tough. I understand divisional games are going to be tough, but I see a massive range inside success, somewhere between 11 and 15 wins. I just think that this defense, and of course we would, be remiss if we didn't talk about how they get to face an AFC East with the Bills at home. The Colts are lost at sea. The Chargers are, fairly average. I think when I look at the schedule, I think the Steelers are better than everybody, clearly, except the Ravens, who just beat you in the playoffs. But this Steelers team is so different. I'll take a split with the Ravens. Maybe I'll say that in the NFC North, you're going to lose one of those games, but I think this is a gift from the gambling gods if you have patience to wait 4 months till the end of the season or whenever it takes for them to get their 9th win, which could be week 10 or 11, New Bear. That's a joke what the odds makers have done here.
Well, you know why they're doing it. At some point, the streak has to end. It's been 18 years of non-losing seasons, and so 8.5 gets you to the point where you're like, this has to be the year where they go 8-9 or worse, because it just can't go on, right? But then you look back at it and you go, look at some of the team, look at some of the quarterback, look at some of the offensive line play, look at some of the offenses that he's won 8, 9, 10 games with, and for all the warts and for all the, bad playoff losses at home, Blake Bortles, and you can go deep there. If you want to, there's plenty of meat on that bone. They've also done, in a lot of cases, more with less and been able to pull rabbits out of hats and put themselves in a position to be talking about the playoffs as long as there are games to be played. Now, you might get the brakes beat off you by whoever it is that you're going up against, but 8.5 is ridiculous because this is a 10-win team with Mason Rudolph. I'm stealing out of your cookie jar. And now you're talking about going all the way down to a Will Howard or a Skylar Thompson. And I'm just going to run it back through previous Mason Rudolph, through Duck Hodges, Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and figuring out ways to get it done. They can't be any worse than those guys. And the defense might be better, should be great, especially if they're getting something from Aaron Rodgers to run from the front and go hunt. And the one thing that is tough, right, is you go, okay, where does it break? Because you can draw stuff up and you can say, well, at the very worst, they should beat Cleveland twice. They should split with Cincinnati. They got to get Baltimore once. And you go, then, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Well, they should beat Miami, right? They should be able to catch Minnesota in have you seen JJ McCarthy at practice? Do we really believe in New England? What is going on in Seattle? But then you also look at it and you go, after the bye, you're talking about playing 12 weeks in a row? And that's a lot when you're talking about 41-year-old quarterback. That's a lot when you're talking about 36-year-old nose tackle or defensive tackle. That's a lot when you're talking about this being the second oldest team in the league is there a point in this season, because we just saw it as recently as last year, where they can go into a tank and lose 4 or 5 in a row, and that's all she wrote.
How did the Steelers give up 45 points to Blake Bortles throwing for 200 yards and Fournette for 100? They scored 45 points with 350 yards of offense.
Well, and that's the origin of playoff Lenny, right? That wasn't just Tampa Tom and the late stage Super Bowl stuff. And what's fascinating is look at what Roethlisberger did that day in a loss, and you look at the numbers that Ben put up in some of those games, and you go, man, Ben lost to Blake Bortles. I mean, no, Coach T and the defense lost to Blake Bortles. Leonard Fournette, I think that was the game where he went, didn't he go like 22 miles an hour on the breakaway run to break their backs? And he's like 248 pounds out there looking like young Jerome Bennett.
I need to check that radar gun. If Lenny Fournette was running 22 miles an hour, I guess it just takes him a while to get up to speed.
Yeah, it's baby Bettis, right? And yeah, that was a really tough day. I mean, everyone talks about Tom Brady stealing their souls, and that was what 36-17, and it wasn't even that close. And but the Blake Bortles one is the one that's really tough. And you just go back.
At this 14 of 26. Yeah. His leading receiver was TJ Yeldon with 3 catches for 57 yards. It does not compute that 45 points.
Yeah, and then click on the Steelers. Click on the Steelers, because I don't look at Ben's line. He threw for 469 and 5 and lost, dude. Like Kaplawi. I mean, that is absolutely worse than Pouncey snapping it over his head on the first play of the game and giving the Browns their first playoff win in modern history. And like as gut punch as the dog pound doing that was, and really that being the true end of because that team started 11-0 and everyone knew they weren't the 2007 Patriots, and eventually it was going to come to a head, but not like that. And it was worse than that. It was worse than that. And Baker Mayfield was playing defensive end for the Carolina Panthers 18 months later, and it was worse than that.
I think that's what's so exciting though about this opportunity is, you want to build a team that leaves no doubt for moments like that, and that Steelers team 2016, I think they're still in wild card mode. They end up with a defense that might have looked pretty good when it comes to total points surrendered, but inside the analytics, the DVOA showed a team that was vulnerable, maybe similar to last year, vulnerable against the run, even though regular season stats are saying you're good. I think you need to approach it not based on how can we have regular season success, but based on how do we make such an amazing team that cannot be denied, like the Eagles did in 2024, doesn't have a weakness. And we attack our weaknesses knowing we might be reckless spending here. We're going to have to recklessly sacrifice in a season or two. And maybe you get Aaron Rodgers back next year and you do it again. You double down on the idea of we're flipping going all in. And 2027 or 2028, we're going to be in salary cap hell. That's really what Sean Payton was great at with the Saints. He was robbed twice. They had to go through multiple 7-11 or 7-9 seasons, I think, in a row. 3 7-9 seasons in a row did the New Orleans Saints in order to play that out. And ultimately he ends up leaving because they were in such salary cap hell that he did not want to see it out. Basically he abandoned that ship and went to Denver instead of trying to rebuild with Drew Brees approaching 40 years old and their salary cap in absolute ruins. All right, speaking of ruins, I don't know what's going on with this frame here on screen. I don't know where Newbear went, so we're going to step aside and we'll see you next time. Till then, we'll see you on the Knoll Road.